one of my favorite cards, and one of the cards that I think has the most dramatic spectrum, is the Devil card. Love the Devil card. The Devil card can mean everything from, I always see as like power struggles, right? But power struggles of like domination and oppression. Or is it you need to break free and you need to rebel and you need to do your own thing? Where does it go on that spectrum? So if I'm reading for myself and I know that entire spectrum and it's something that's high stakes, I'm going to like tilt it toward the like thing that I want it to. It's just human nature. I think when there's high stakes issues, I will not read for myself. I will not read for myself. I want an outside person to read for me because it's too tricky. If it's a low stakes thing, oh, what do I need to know about this thing that's happening today? Fine, I'll pull 3 cards. But will I do a big Celtic cross for myself? So rarely, like probably I can count it on my fingers, how many times I have done that in at least in the last 20 years, because it's it's the objectivity. As I say to people, surgeons don't operate on themselves, therapists don't therapize themselves. They don't you go to another therapist, you go to another doctor. What?
Doctor, heal thyself, physician. You do need to go to other experts sometimes. Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead. Today's episode is one I'm very excited to share with you. Our guest was the author, diviner, and witch, Madame Pamita. Madame Pamita, for those who don't already know her, is an accomplished tarot reader, teacher, and the author of the excellent book Magical Tarot, Your Essential Guide to Reading the Cards, and previously she has also written the Book of Candle Magic. Her work focuses on making tarot and magic accessible, bringing a fresh approach to the cards and to magic itself. In this conversation, we explored many ways to develop our skills as diviners, both personally and professionally. In this interview, she shared her wisdom and her insights into using magic and divination to create more joyful paths through life, and I'm really excited to share this interview with you today. Before we dive into that, I'd also like to announce that my fellow High Priestess of the North Wildwood tradition, Denise Crucy, and I will be presenting a workshop at the Sacred Space Conference at the end of March in 2025. It'll be a workshop actually on the forms of seer work, oracular practice that Denise and I perform as part of our tradition. And the gathering will be held in Baltimore, the Baltimore, D.C. area, and feature incredible presenters including Matt Oren, Ivo Dominguez Jr., and many others. It is definitely going to be an exciting weekend of learning and connection, and I'm excited to be a part of it. You can find information in the show notes if you're interested in looking at the conference to attend. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to it, and feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at Coffee and Divination. Enjoy the show. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It is my absolute pleasure to have Madame Pamita on the podcast for the first time. She is, as you've heard from my introduction, someone who kind of doesn't need an introduction. I'm willing to bet that a lot of our listeners have encountered her works and her books before, but it is a pleasure to have you on today. So thank you for your time.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Joanna. It's wonderful to be here and talking with you about one of my favorite topics.
Excellent. Clearly one of mine as well. So we have kind of it's loosely a traditional first question, which is one you might probably expect, which is, I like to ask guests if there is a particular, way that you were first introduced to divination. That could be the first time that you practiced it, or it could be something where it's even earlier in sort of the timeline of your life of someone in your family who practiced that you were around when you were younger. And if not that, then what your first, forays into divination were.
Oh my gosh. Well, I grew up in a magical household. My mom's was Ukrainian American. I'm Ukrainian American. And so in Slavic culture, there's not really a panic as much about divination and magic and spells. It's really folk magic, right? And so people that go to church can perform magic. That was never an issue. So in my childhood, I, would look at the horoscopes and had a Ouija board and all of these things that were just kind of like, it was fine. Remember having the unfortunately named Gypsy Witch fortune telling deck when I was little. And then when I was 10 years old, my folks, I'm in LA and live in LA still, was born and raised here. And when I was little, my sister lived in Boston. My folks and I went out to visit my sister, my older sister, and I was 10 years old. We went to Salem, Massachusetts, and we went into a little shop, which I am sure was Lori Cabot's shop back in 1974. She was the only witchy thing around in 1974 in Salem. And my mom said, pick a souvenir. And I picked a little miniature Rider-Waite deck as my souvenir. And I was thinking about, in retrospect, I'm sure that is the first tarot deck I ever even saw, let alone purchased. And I remember being very excited because I loved this idea of fortune telling and bringing it home and then looking at the little white book and going, what the hell? You know? I still look at the little white book and say, what the hell, oftentimes. But looking at that, and then I ended up playing, I'm a 10-year-old girl. So I ended up playing with them like paper dolls. I had the characters in the tarot talk to one another and had adventures together. So they were like dolls. On my trip, I was playing with them. So I think actually in retrospect, that made a very good beginning to my relationship with tarot, because then I started to really develop relationships, at least with the Rider-Waite-Smith, and develop a relationship with each of those cards that was childlike and intuitive. And then when I was older, I'm like, oh my God, I have to memorize a book, as you all do when you're teenagers. I have to memorize this. I have to do this. And so then that kind of squashed that childlike discovery and wonder at the cards. Because invariably every fall, it would be in fall, I would say, okay, every day I'm going to learn one card. And in 2.5 months, I'll know all the cards. And of course, I got to, probably got to the Wheel of Fortune, if that, and then I gave up, So that was the beginning of my relationship with tarot. So it's been now 50 years that I just turned 60 this year. So it's been 50 years that I've been around tarot, and probably 40 years that I've been, seriously a reader,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is really, really wonderful. And I love that. I love that image of like playing with them when you're on a road trip and having that sense of relating to them. It is really true, because I think that I didn't start quite that young. I started when I was like 12 or 13. And I do understand about like when you are first delving into it, before it gets too rigid in terms of your expectation that there's going to be one way of doing it. There's something that's very beautiful about that innocent way of first getting to them, and then holding on to that is tricky, obviously. Probably impossible for good reason, and we have to go through it, but still. That's really lovely. So you wrote, I'm sure we're gonna be talking a lot about, ways of getting to know the tarot and how we navigate that. You wrote a really lovely book, which I am so happy that I've been able to recommend to people who are, first starting with tarot. And it is something that I think gives a good synthesis of a lot of different, shall we say, books that are fantastic, but they may not really be appropriate for someone who is first trying to just get their hands on cards and dive into it. With the decks that you work with in that book, you stress the Rider-Waite, and I'm assuming that in your own practice you still maintain a strong connection to the Rider-Waite. Are there any other decks that you work frequently with?
Well, I think most of us like to, that's my very, very familiar. I call the Rider-Waite-Smith my old friends, right? They're my oldest friends, probably. Other than a couple friends from, elementary school, but I've been around that deck so long that are old and familiar. So I do enjoy jumping into a deck that's very different. I just started playing around with the Ask the Witch tarot the other day. That's a great one. There's a deck called the I wish I was at home and I had all my decks in front of me. It's Athena Noctua, and her deck is the Unhidden Path. That's not right. Unsomething Path. Her deck is amazing and gorgeous. And then also too, what I have here with me today is the Wiser Tarot, which is a variation, a new sort of reimagining of the Rider-Waite-Smith with different paint and like watercolors and different skin tones, which I kind of, always felt like the Rider-Waite-Smith is of its time and place, which was England in 1909. But to have this sort of new version where we see more of what is reflected, the diversity that's reflected in the world, I love seeing that. So that deck is pretty awesome. There's a deck called the Muse Tarot by Chris Ann that is absolutely gorgeous, and I love that deck. That deck is very different. It's a collage deck. So there's a lot of decks I like to play with, and I like to venture out. If I'm doing a reading for a client, I'll just go to the Rider-Waite-Smith because it's easy. But I'm doing this. I do a fundraiser for Ukraine, for seniors in Ukraine, to feed seniors in Ukraine every Sunday, and that's when I bring out these other decks because I feel like I can play a little bit more. I can have a little bit more fun. I can have a discovery. I can share these discoveries with people because I'm doing this as a streaming thing on YouTube on Sunday nights. So so those are some of the decks that I'm intrigued with and have enjoyed working with. I like a deck that's very rich, that has a lot of detail and a lot of imagery. That's me. Some decks are very spare, and I don't, it's all right. It might be pretty, but I don't really feel that it's as useful for me, who likes to delve into all the little detailed pieces,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. You've kind of partially answered my next question, which was, are the context in which you use different decks. And so basically when you're doing a reading for someone, you would be using Rider-Waite primarily, as opposed to working with others. I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
because
it's for yourself, or in these kinds of exploratory modes of like showing people and sharing with it, that you would use other forms.
I really love when I have someone that's a client, we're doing a one-on-one session, we need, they're paying for time with me. And so I feel like the focus is them, their question, and getting an answer. And I can get the fastest answers, the most accurate answers. I'm not fumbling around with it. That's not what they're paying for, is for me to fumble around and go, wow, this deck is really fascinating. Oh my gosh, look at that symbol. I feel like this, like that's what I'm doing when I'm doing the fundraiser, because I can be a little more free, have a little bit more fun, and then a little more play. People are making a donation. It's $10 per card. The money's all going to, feed seniors in Ukraine. So, we can have a little more fun and stretch it out a little bit more. It's not a by the clock thing, right? When people are paying by the clock, I want to get those answers as fast as possible. And so I use the Rider-Waite-Smith for, just for expediency, I'll say, because it's the one I'm very, very familiar with. I still discover new things in it. One of the biggest compliment I got about my book was Judica Illes, who, of course, anything Judica says is like a sparkle on you, feels like, oh my gosh, she's so lovely and so kind. She said, she's been reading as long as I have. And she said, your book helped me discover new things in the Rider-Waite-Smith that I had not seen before, which was a huge compliment. That's a huge compliment. So I think while it's a book that's very good and entry level and easy for people to enter into, I also think it's a good book for people who have experience with the Rider-Waite-Smith, because you may discover things that you hadn't thought of before or seen before. So, so thank you so much for recommending that book to people. It's so kind of you. It's wonderful.
Yeah, there's not many that I shouldn't say this. There's so many good books out there, but it is one that is at near the very top of that list. Let's put it that way, for a very good reason. And what I also appreciate about the way in which you discuss tarot in the book is that there is a degree of, it's realistic, but also positive in its focus, which is not to say, you read professionally, and therefore, you're very aware that there are times when the answer that a client is going to receive is not what they want to hear. And sometimes, arguably the most valuable things that we can learn from divination are the times when it's like, well, this is a trap, and it's good that we saw this trap before you step in it. But yet without you convey that without going into negativity or things that could start to, trap people in bad patterns of thought or fear. How did you how do you think about that balance of positivity while still staying realistic with interpretations of cards? Because I think in the book you do that really beautifully.
Well, one of the reasons I wrote this book, anytime I write a book because I feel like that book doesn't exist in the world. That information doesn't exist. And one of the things that I found was as I was teaching, I've been teaching for over a decade now. As I was teaching people and they would get afraid, a lot of people that are new to tarot have there's a lot of baggage that tarot has since the 80s, really. I will say that, really, the satanic panic and all of that, that tarot has gotten some bad press. And what it's just, people that have an agenda. Let's just be honest, right? So, that's where the bad press is coming from. So, so if, people that were approaching it sometimes were nervous or afraid, and then the images on the Rider-Waite-Smith in general can, can be intense, right? The Devil's intense, the Tower's intense, Ten of Swords is intense. They're not fluffy cards where it's not a Doreen Virtue fairies deck, it's not that, right? So how do we look at this card? And I think of myself and I think of readers having a style, right? Different readers have different styles, right? It's just like anything, music, art, we all have different styles, right? So my style tends to be very success oriented. You come to me for a reading, it's because you want to find a solution and get to where you want to go, right? Get to the place that you want to be. So when I was writing the book, I was like, well, gosh, there's these books that, say, really harsh things. And I want there to be a success. Like, yes, you're going to be dealing with this challenge, but how do you deal with this challenge and what can come out of this? Well, blessing can come out of a challenge. One of my spiritual tenets is that when we get something that looks crappy, look for the diamond in the crap, right? There's some gift in this crappy situation. And if you look for it, you can find it, you can have it, right? You can have that diamond. So I think about like things like those. I did a whole panel at PantheaCon with Judica Illes, Mary Kay Greer, myself and myself and someone else, and then Rachel Pollack was in the audience also contributing. I didn't know she was going to be there. I would have had her on the panel, but we talked about this, how to deal with the scary cards of the tarot. And this was right, I think when my book first came out that we had this, or maybe my book came out soon afterwards. But what the point was is that these scary cards actually have a gift in them if you're willing to look for the gift. So the scary cards are the ones that I kind of actually get intrigued and excited with. It's not being unrealistic. I'm not looking at, I don't know, let's say like the Nine of Swords, and which is that person that's in despair and say, oh, joy, happiness, great. It's not that, but how do we confront these things? How do we transmute this energy? How do we transform this stuff? So that is where I'm coming from with it. It's like, yeah, we got a thing, but we're going to transmute it. So
yeah, and that then ties into the fact that in addition to doing divination, you're obviously a practicing witch, and therefore there is the other side of it, which is that what can you do about it? Sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes it is just the Nine of Swords is happening. You are either already there or it's very soon after this moment, which doesn't mean you can avoid it altogether, but there might be ways that you could influence the situation. So I'm assuming that kind of ties into how you view what is changeable versus what is not, and kind of with your practice, because I know some magicians that will do divination will immediately kind of be looking for what is magic that you could do to change this fate, to make a change. Is that something that you generally look for right away, or do you think of that as like a separate piece where first we make peace with what is coming and then maybe we look at magical ways to influence it?
yeah, magic can show up in I always think of magic, and I have clients who just want to see what's going on and they're not interested in magic. And I have clients that are very interested in magic. And so it sort of depends on the client and, where they're at and what they want to do. And if they want to do something to transform. The other thing is, in my boyfriend's working at the shop today and he's in the camera when he goes back there. He doesn't realize it.
We're going to talk about your offerings and your work in that sense a little later, I'm sure.
Anyway, so when we work with magic, it isn't always, it can be a mindset shift. It doesn't have to necessarily be we sit down and do a candle spell. A candle spell can be the answer, but sometimes it's like, how do we view this? How do we change it? How do we transmute it? Sometimes it can be a spell. Sometimes it could be a shift in your mindset. Sometimes we taking a material world action. So it's always whatever is appropriate, right? I wouldn't say to someone, if I'm seeing like in their reading, they want a new job, but they're not putting out resumes, or they want a new relationship and they get the hermit card, right? I'm like, okay, you need to get out more. That is, maybe we can enhance that with spell work, but it can also be just get out more, right? It can be a material world action. So I think of magic, my definition of magic is our focused thought and our will moving and our energy moving toward a goal that to shape or shift something or move something or transform something. So it can be lots of things. It doesn't necessarily have to always be magic. It can be magic, or it could be action, or it can be magic and action, all of those things. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I find that one of the things that is always interesting to me is helping people find the right question, the question that they need to ask at the given moment. And when I've spoken to other diviners, some people have a very hands-off approach where they're just like, nope, I am here. I am sort of like the neutral person working with the tool in order to allow the answer to come through. It is not my job to frame their question. And that is the client, that is the person who has come to me. And then other people that are very hands-on are like, well, they come to me and they have this issue, and I see it as part of my role to help them get to the best question. And I was wondering, like, kind of how do you feel about that role of helping with a question, or nope, they come, they have their question, let them do their thing. I'm here to facilitate it.
I think most clients that come to me already know what they're coming to me for, what question that they have. However, sometimes I think what is more interesting to me, honestly, with tarot, if we're working with tarot, is not a yes, no question. We could do a yes, no question if it's appropriate, but oftentimes, like I'll say, will I get a boyfriend in this month? Will I, find someone this month? I said, how about we look at how you're going to find someone, or what action you can take to bring that person into your life. And I would say 100% of the time they say, yes, let's look at that, because it empowers the person, right? Versus like, yes or no, is just like, is it going to happen? Versus how can which must be magic. I guess I'm leading them to a magical question. Let's like, what can you do? An energetic thing, a practical, like what's going to lead us there? It's an empowering thing to be able for someone to tell you, I think we can get you there. Yeah, we can get you to the job, the boyfriend, the success, the money, the whatever it is you want. Let's find that path for you. I often say that tarot is the map, but you have to go on the journey, right? It's the map. So what journey do we want? We get to pick our own adventure. I believe 100% I believe in free will. So we can always change something we don't like that we see in the tarot, right? So
yeah. And with that being said, I think it was Sam Block was on a while back, and we were talking about geomancy, and his opinion was that, because he also works with tarot and other forms of divination, and it's almost as if we're talking about different forms of divination having different styles of answer. Like we as the people doing the reading, we have our styles of reading, but then the tools themselves, or the spirits that speak through them, have their own styles. And he brought up the point that he feels that geomancy sometimes answers exactly what was asked as opposed to what should have been asked, whereas some other tools will be a little bit more kind. And this is not necessarily when someone is getting a reading with a professional, someone like you who's going to help them craft their question or help get to that right question. Do you feel like sometimes the cards will be like, oh, you asked this, but really what you need to know about is this? Or is it more of a literal, you asked this, you get the answer? you know.
It's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, it brings up a very interesting, you bring up kind of tangentially an interesting topic, which is different forms of divination for different types of questions. So just the other day, I do pet and animal work as well, like, help people with their pets, do like pet, I guess you call it pet psychic readings. But for pet stuff, I know someone had a lost pet, and I'm like, we're not going to do tarot. They booked a tarot session. I'm like, we're not going to do tarot. We're going to use the pendulum, because an animal is much more concrete. They're very spiritual. Animals are extremely spiritual, but they're also, when they're trying to communicate, we need to home in on where that dog is, your lost dog is. So let's use the pendulum. I'm not going to do a tarot reading to find a lost dog. It's just not the right tool for it. So I think there are tools like that. And I think when we do a tarot reading, sometimes it is just the answer. Most of the times I would say it's addressing the answer, but sometimes I'm like, oh, there's this interesting other element. Usually it's like a spiritual element. I mean, if we talk about the Celtic cross and how we view that bottom and top card on the cross, I look at those cards. I mean, there's 20 different versions of what that can be: subconscious and conscious, hidden and visible and all of that. But I look at that bottom card as your spiritual foundation, the middle cross card as where you are now, and the upper card as what is your spiritual expansion. And sometimes that's like, you have to do something hard. You have to overcome a challenge. You have to grow in some way. That's the growth up there. So that I've been doing for years and years and years, and it works so well in a reading. So sometimes in a reading, if I'm doing a Celtic cross and somebody has a question, I'm like, oh, wait, you've got some spiritual growth happening, a potential to really expand your spirit by doing this. And it has nothing to do with your question. Or it has little to do with your question. So sometimes that'll pop up. Not always, but sometimes it will. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's sort of the additional lesson that maybe we can't see the connection, but maybe somewhere in there's a connection of whatever it is they need to know at that particular moment.
Yeah. You'll see, and as readers do, if we see something that we're like, I'm getting this message, it doesn't make sense to me, but I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to share this with you. Does that make any sense to you? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, that's a. And so sometimes it is a collaborative effort where I'm like, heck, and they're like, oh, that makes total sense, so
that brings up an interesting point about trust and communication. I mean, you read professionally now, and you have for quite a while, of course. So when you were first developing those skills of reading for others, was it something that you just had to do a lot of in order to find that confidence, or how do you feel about developing the confidence to be able to say that? Because I've had conversations with people that will say to me, well, I really want to read for others, but it's so much pressure, because what if I make a mistake and then I feel so much guilt or connection to this, and then there's sort of like a need to balance, of course, taking it seriously and understanding that this is a trust thing that someone comes to you with, but how do you develop that confidence in a way that is still reasonable, shall we say?
Oh my gosh, that's really part of my whole tarot story, because I'm a Cancer, and the very typical Cancerian trait is, if you think about a crab, they have a hard shell on the outside, tough on the outside, squishy on the inside, right? So the things that are very dear to me, the things that I hold very close in my heart, I am very loath to reveal those to people, because I feel like they're squishy. And if somebody pokes at it in a not nice way, it's going to make me feel sad, right? So for decades, I did readings only for close friends. I did not put myself out there. I never told anybody outside of my circle that I was a reader. And I was only doing readings for myself and my friends, and I would do them for free. And what I did was I'm also a musician, and I was playing this old timey music from like the 1920s, and doing this I wanted to do like a little variety show, vaudeville show. And I'm like, what can I do? What can I do? Oh, I know how to read tarot. I could do a thing where like we have a deck of cards, of tarot cards. I wouldn't have obviously the whole deck, 78, no way. But I had, a selection of cards. I had audience members come up and pick a card. I would tell a funny fortune. And then my band and I would play some old timey jazz or blues or folky song from like the 1920s that thematically went along with it. Like they pulled a lover's card. There's a song, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and this old funny jokey song from the 20s. So we would do this show around town in LA, and I was doing it like, okay, I know how to do this, but I'm not actually saying that I'm like, I'm going to do a reading for you. And what people started doing is like, oh my gosh, can you come and do readings at my Halloween party? Can you do a reading for me right now here in the club? They would ask for it. So that started me going like, oh, actually, instead of being like, oh, you're terrible, what the heck are you doing? And what's this awful thing? Or you're not a good reader or whatever, people were actually very eager for it. So from that, I started doing party readings. Party readings are, for me, were the perfect match. That might not be a great way for everyone to start, but it was amazing for me because you are there to give people a good time, right? So the stakes are low. The party goers have not paid you for a reading. They haven't, they're not asking you deep questions most of the time. It's like, oh, how's my career? How's my love life? And so that helped me to build my trust and confidence, not about my skill. Like I knew my skill was there, but it was more about judgment from people. And so that's what gave me the confidence, is doing that. So oftentimes I say to my students, if you are not feeling like, oh, I'm not really feeling up to like charging for a reading, go to a party and do readings for your friends. Do readings and then the stakes are low. People are not asking, for the most part, they're not asking deep and important questions. They're just wanting to have a good time at the party, right? So that is my advice. But you have to be a social person. You have to be an outgoing person, of course. And that you have to be fast doing party readings. That's the name of the game.
Yep.
Is you can't do a Celtic cross for every party member. You're doing 1, 2, or 3 cards. You're going less than 5 minutes, and then next person. But everybody feels like they had a great experience. That's the amazing thing. You would think you need to do a whole big reading for someone. No, they just want to have a little fun experience and then talk to their friends. Oh my gosh, she said I was going to meet someone this year. That's amazing, or whatever, So yeah, I think those low stakes, setting yourself up for low stakes things. I mean, I did back in the beginning of being professional. I did school carnivals. Any place where I could set up a pop-up and a table, I was there and doing readings. So yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. But I think that that's also, what you were saying about your tarot book. It is a very reasonable sized book, but I also know, I'm looking at my bookshelves. I have some that are like gigantic tomes. There is nothing intrinsically about the length of something that has any real anything real to do with what wisdom is in it. You can have things that are very expansive and I don't want to say long-winded, because that's not quite what I mean, but things that go into an enormous amount of detail that are very valuable. You could also have things that go into a lot of detail that don't really say very much. You can also have things that are very quick readings that you've gotten to the absolute heart of what someone needs. And it's in this kind of like lighthearted, open context, but that absolutely can be the meat of the matter of something that really that person desperately needed to hear. And it doesn't mean anything whether it's, a context that we think is serious or not. It can still have a lot of meaning for people and be very important to them. So yeah, that's beautiful. I could not agree more. It's also something that I really appreciate, because there's so in my life also, in our coven, we will oftentimes tell our students that, like, if you can't explain something in a very short, few sentences, you probably don't really understand it that well. And if you need to use too much jargon and too much specialized language, you actually really may not understand it well enough at all. So there's also something to be said for saying, like, I'm going to do this at a party. It is distilling and seeing how you can distill that knowledge down. That's not actually that easy to do. So yeah, that is really beautiful.
Yeah. So I think that, it's interesting in my book, when you sign a book contract, you sign for a certain number of words. I have a tendency to way overwrite. Like, I want to put every gem, really shoehorn every bit of detail and passion that I have about the thing that I'm writing about. And I'm always over word count. Never in my life have I ever been under word count. And I always worry about, oh my God, am I going to write enough? And never is a problem. But, with this book, I wanted to put more into it. I wanted it to be like, oh, there was a spell for every, like a meditation for every card, a spell for every card. Like I wanted to do, and I got like halfway through when I was already at my word count. I'm like, oh, I can't have all those things in it. Dang it. But what that forced me to do was get to that real essence, like get to the core of what do we want to say about this card. So there is like a chapter of like, how do you use these cards in different ways? How can you, there definitely is that magical component in there, but I had to get really, I think that makes, I can be a very rambly writer and a rambly talker. So forcing it to be succinct was the editor's job. Judica did an amazing job, and I just adore her, And she's like, don't have enough room for that. Sorry, got to cut that down. I'm like, okay.
Well, I'm really appreciative, and for those who haven't read the book, there are journal prompts and also affirmations that you include, and I think that those are so valuable. I use those. I think they're really excellent, and they are something that there's a lot of potential in them. And outside of just the ones that you include, it's also the inspiration for people to then create their own and go further down that path if they want to, or they can use the excellent ones that are there. But yeah, that's a beautiful thing that's included.
Yeah, thank you.
With when you are reading, we've talked about reading for clients, and in your book you give obviously quite a number of examples of how to get started and what you recommend for people to begin getting to know the cards. Is there anything about the protocol of how you read? I'm sure that obviously there are certain private things that you wouldn't want to put on a podcast episode, but is there anything that you could share with us about how you frame doing readings for yourself or clients? Like, are there ways that you sort of set your intentions, or any particular spirits or prayers that you like to do? Is there something about your process that you could share with us?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, we have to remember, especially when we're reading and we're reading a lot, that we are not at a little factory pumping out,
Yes.
I call it going down to the old tarot mines today. Even though you are reading for many people, your experience as the reader is like, I'm just reading for a bunch of people today. And I love my clients, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to see this person, that person. That's awesome. That's awesome. But you have to remember as the reader that for that person, that's a very precious and important moment. And what you say and the words you use and the choice of how you frame things is you should be very, I would just say sanctify it. Like really look at this as like a very important, special moment that you're sharing with someone, and they're going to take everything that you say to heart. I say that because I remember being 18 and going to a palmist on the Santa Monica Pier. Her name was Doreen. I even remember her name, Doreen. And I remember her looking at my palm for $5. And fortunately, she wasn't a scammy person because, they're the ones that are like, oh my God, you've got a dark cloud over you. You need to pay me $1,000 to remove that, curse. So either she wasn't that, or she just thought I didn't have any money because I was 18 years old. I don't know which. But she said things, and I remember every freaking thing that she said in there, everything that she said. So if I can remember something that happened 40 years ago, 42 years ago, and remember exactly, that's what I always remembered about my readings. And when I'm doing a reading for someone, not to be flippant, not to be cavalier, not to be like, well, too bad, Tower card and 10 of Swords. Sorry, bye. Let me take your money. Never, never, never. So I think that is the first thing that I think all readers ought to remember and keep in mind. And I always keep that in mind. That is like an overarching thing. In terms of like the actual things that I do, I always start out by having what is, there's this in Slavic magic, there's this practice when you're doing a healing on somebody that you first sit and you have a cup of tea and you chat with them and you find out what's going on and let them unburden themselves, right? This is not just exclusively Slavic practice. We find this with curanderismo, that people have a platicar, that they have a conversation before they do the healing and the cleansing. So I have that as part of my session and let the person share everything that's going on. That is helpful to unburden themselves, because many times this is stuff that they may not be able to share with anybody else. They may not have friends that they can trust or family that they can trust with this very personal information. So this is a very sacred time with them. And then after we do that, while they're doing that, usually what I'm doing is I'm cutting the cards, I'm stacking the cards into 3 stacks. I'm shifting the energy from the old reading. Then after I've done that, after they've had their chat and they've talked about everything that they want to talk about, then I ask them to, if I'm doing a remote reading, I ask them to listen to the shuffle, tell me when to stop. Then after that, I put the cards back together, do that whole rigmarole. And then I say, all right, I'm going to say a blessing over our session today. And what that entails is me first sending you love and light. Then I open myself to divine wisdom. I set the intention for the reading that is for the highest good, with the highest love, and for the highest enlightenment. Now, clients that I've done that for many times, I don't tell them that I'm going to do that. I just do it. But the first time I meet with a client, I often tell them this is what I'm going to do as a blessing. Then I take a little moment, 10 or 15 seconds, do that. And I'm really feeling like an energetic heart to heart connection with the client. And then I open up that divine connection of, my head, my crown chakra, my brain. I don't know what's going on, something up there. And then I'm ready to begin. So I do have a little ritual in the beginning. I'm happy to share it all. I mean, there's nothing secret about it. I share it with my students. I still teach tarot and I share it with my students too. So.
Yeah. That's very important that you are reminding all of us of the importance of that our words, absolutely. I don't think anyone who's listening to this podcast would not be aware that the words that we are speaking when we're speaking to ourselves too, when we're reading for ourselves, like we have to be careful how we are talking to ourselves about these things, and having that same kind of kindness and attention to how we're setting our intentions for ourselves, just as much as if it was a close friend or a client that you care for, of course.
Important.
That does bring me to a question, which is, do you ever find, are there contexts when you say, you know what, I'm not going to read for myself on this. I'm too close to this. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Usually there's always like things where you're like, oh yeah, no, my friend's going to have to read on that. But
exactly. Listen, when the stakes are high, it's when all the meanings of that card. So like I look at cards really have a spectrum. Each card has a spectrum. So if I'm just going to throw out one of my favorite cards, and one of the cards that I think has the most dramatic spectrum is the Devil card. Love the Devil card. The Devil card can mean everything from I always see as like power struggles, right? But power struggles of like domination and oppression, or is it you need to break free and you need to rebel and you need to do your own thing? Where does it go on that spectrum? So if I'm reading for myself and I know that entire spectrum and it's something that's high stakes, I'm going to tilt it toward the thing that I want it to. Yeah. It's just human nature. I think when there's high stakes issues, I will not read for myself. I will not read for myself. I want an outside person to read for me, because it's too tricky. If it's a low stakes thing, what do I need to know about this thing that's happening today? Fine, I'll pull 3 cards. But will I do a big Celtic cross for myself? So rarely, probably I can count it on my fingers, how many times I have done that at least in the last 20 years, because it's the objectivity. As I say to people, surgeons don't operate on themselves. Therapists don't therapize themselves. They don't, you go to another therapist, you go to another doctor. What?
Yeah. Doctor, heal thyself, physician. You do need to go to other experts sometimes. So yes.
Yeah. I think that's a really great analogy, because a doctor who sees a lump somewhere can know all the possibilities of what it can mean, from nothing to very bad, right? So you would want to go to somebody else who can look at it objectively and doesn't have skin in the game, And I think that I think one of the best things that you can do is go to a reader who doesn't know you at all or who knows very little about you, because then they have to rely on their intuition, and that can reveal amazing things to you. Amazing things. I mean, I've had amazing readings with people that knew me little or not at all, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. When you do, when you advise people, because I know in the book you talk about, drawing a card, and as you were saying, when you were little and you were like, I'm going to memorize the meanings of each card in a row, one by one. When you are learning tarot, or perhaps, further advanced in studies, do you think that it is helpful to still simply like draw a card for the day, or do you feel that each time you are kind of going to the cards or going to a form of divination, you should have a question in mind? Because I know some people that are very like, oh, you should only open the box of cards if you have a question in mind, or else just leave them alone. You know what I mean? I'm just curious where you fall on that spectrum.
I think there's validity to both. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. Some people may feel like they only want to go to it for a question. That's fine. And other people may want to have that card of the day that they can reflect on. I probably tend to be more in that camp. That tends to be more, oh, these are my friends. I want to see what they have to say. I want to hang out with them. So it doesn't have to be like you only get together with your friends when there's I mean, I guess I lean way more because when I say for myself, I don't just want to hang out with my friends when I need something from them. That's a little crappy, isn't it? So
What can you do for me?
exactly. Like, I want to hang out with my friends just to hang out and have fun and get to know them. So I really encourage my students to like do those journal prompts or do the affirmations, because it builds relationship. I build relationship. I'm an animist. I see everything as alive, including, oh my God, the cards are so alive to me. The images are so alive to me. Pamela Coleman Smith's absolute brilliance. It's so alive, and there's always new discoveries, and there's always something new to learn. And I learned so much by writing the book. I got into it. I'm like, what? There's a guard in the back of the six of what? It's 40 years and I never noticed that guy before, I mean, like stuff like that, so yeah. It's always new things to discover.
Oh, oh, that is unending, I am very sure. So you've already answered my question, which is, of course, that you do view these cards as spirits, which I completely agree with you that they are. It is about relating to them and getting to know them as spirits. Does that lead you to feel that it's one of those, it's kind of a tricky question to ask and answer, but like, do you feel that there are times when it takes a certain amount of time to get to know a deck? I mean, we've already established like mostly you're going to go to your Rider Waite because those are the ones, for clients. But like, is there a period of time that you feel is the getting to know each other friendship stage, shall we say, before you're ready to really kind of dive in and do more serious work? Or is it sometimes you just open the pack of cards and it's like, you guys, oh, it's good to see you.
Well, I feel like, what's been fun is as I have been exploring and reading and actively doing readings with the new decks that I have been, like the Muse Tarot is a very different, it is not Rider-Waite-Smith based. There's not much Rider-Waite-Smith on it. So there's a kind of wonderful feeling about like the old pair of jeans feeling about the Rider-Waite-Smith that makes it very easy to get to answers and stuff like that. But in terms of my own exploration, there's a different kind of, there's a little like butterflies in the stomach excitement, like meeting a new person that you are in love with, a friend or a lover or whatever that happens when you come across a new deck that you really connect with. And I'm pretty picky about decks. As I said earlier, I like a lot of detail. I can admire a deck that's very simple, but I don't get a lot of emotional excitement or passion, or, it doesn't really create that vision for me, where I feel like, I can't wait to look. Wow, look at this card. What can it mean? I love losing myself in an image and going into the image and seeing the symbols and interpreting the symbols. And when there's new stuff, it's exciting, right? It's exciting to get into a deck that isn't your old friend, right? I think that's like apples and oranges. There's things about having those old friends, and there's wonderful things about a new friend. And so I like exploring too. And I've really been enjoying that. And then in this context where I get to actually do readings with these, like I would take a new deck to a party because it's low stakes again. But I would also say like doing this thing where I'm doing the streaming thing and we're in a plane and every couple of weeks I pull out a different deck and I start working with that one and I develop these new relationships with these new decks. So it's fun to explore that. It's absolutely amazing and fun to go down that path and explore and have fun with it. And then also too, another thing we can get into, oh my God, this is a little tangent. Quality of the freaking paper and the texture of the coating is huge. Like it is as important to me as the finishes on the cards, right?
And size of the cards. Like sometimes I'll end up with decks that they're so lovely. I can't, they're giant in my hands and I have kind of big hands, but yeah. there are certain tactile feel things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's what I love about Wiser Tarot is that it is like it's got a great coating. The cards are nice, they're really good. Like it's really so I appreciate that tactile part as much as anything else. Oh, another deck I haven't been using lately, and I just want to give it a shout out is the Silver Acorn Tarot by Stephanie Buscema. I did the book for that deck.
Oh, it is about that one. I don't know it yet, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous deck. Beautiful. The reason I thought of it is beautiful finish. It's got like a linen finish. The cards move like butter. They're so good. She's a reader herself, and she really wanted to, like, she was also as concerned with the tactile thing as her beautiful imagery. She did hand paintings. It's nothing digital but her art. She's all hand painted cards. And they're in this wonderful, whimsical style. And I love that deck. I mean, not just because I wrote the book for it, and not just because I think she's an amazing artist, but because it draws you into this world with anthropomorphic vegetables and skeletons and animals and this little like dark, kind of cute, spooky world. But it feels fully embodied. Like stories could be written about the images in these cards. And I love a card that tells a story. That's it, man. I love a card that tells a story.
Okay, I gotta look at those cards now. So
I'll hook you up. Yeah.
So kind of just we were talking about sort of reading for yourself, reading for others. And I had someone asked me a question which I've been pondering and kind of thinking with what the answer is. When you're reading for yourself, let's say, and not as experienced with this stuff, we were already just saying how with the devil card, all the different spectrum of interpretations you can have with that. And this person was saying, well, I sit down to read, and then by the time I'm done sort of reading for myself, I've read myself into a mess because I could come up with, you know what I mean? Like I've gotten so pulled down so many rabbit holes of what each card is that they never kind of feel like they arrive at an answer, quote unquote. Like the importance of being able to take the things that you know about the cards and draw them into something that is complete, something you could actually hold in your hands as a thing you now know or that you're going to act on. Is there any advice that you would give to people who feel like they get kind of pulled in too many directions with what they know of the cards, or how to distill down all of that, which is tricky?
Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, that's where intuition comes in. I think, there's people that read completely intuitively. There's people that read completely by the book symbolically. But I think for me, the magic spot is in between. We want to understand. That's why my book exists, to explain those symbols to you and give one interpretation. Obviously, you're going to go to another book and get other interpretations. Pick and choose what works for you, cherry pick what works for you, and then add that to your bag of tricks of the understanding of that card and the symbols in that card. So we look at a card like the High Priestess, so rich with symbolism. I mean, there's so many symbols in that card, right? But what are you going to home? What jumps out for you? That's the intuitive part. Is it the pomegranates on the, cloth? Is it the Isis crown on her head? Is it the Torah scroll in her arms? What is the thing that is jumping out for you? And that you can learn and do with any deck that you come to. And the intuitive part is to pick the thing. You're not going to read every single symbol. You're not going to read every single meaning. It's like, what is pinging for me when I look at that card in light of this question? What jumps out for me? That is your intuition speaking. If you are having trouble with that, and this is what I teach people, if you're having trouble, if you're looking at the spectrum, let's get some binary yes, no answers here. Let's bring out a pendulum, like our training wheels if we need it. I think of a pendulum being a wonderful tool for developing intuition because it is yes or no, right? It's and you don't need to learn anything. You just need to pick it up and you can start working with it and start asking questions. So you can look at that High Priestess card and you can say, am I supposed to be focusing on the crescent moon at her feet? Yes or no? And if it says yes, then you go there. If it says no, go to the next symbol. And that can help you to not be overwhelmed with all of the symbolism, all of the meaning, all of the, richness of those wonderful, rich cards that we love so much. So I think simple cards are great. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're beautiful, but I cannot lose myself in a simple card because it's just one thing, right? It doesn't intrigue me. I like a little mystery.
But then you're also, advocating for using things that can help you distill down, like a pendulum. So then you need that, then you go to that. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can also use that for your interpretation. Is this devil card about rebellion? Oh, no. Okay. Is this devil card about oppression? Yes. Okay. Now I know what it's about. So you don't have to even home in on the different symbols. You can home in on the general meaning and get your confirmation if you're confused. I think that to me is more helpful, especially for someone who's new to tarot, than pulling a clarifying card, which is just going to add more to the mix. I mean, an experienced reader, yes, pull a clarifying card if you want to know more. But a new person to it, it's like, oh my God, we're going to overwhelm them with more symbolism to help them clarify their already confused mind about this. Let's get something simpler there. So, yeah.
Draw 5 clarifying cards and then add that.
Exactly. Till you get the one you want, right? Oh my God.
You're just basically going until you get that, the lover's card. There we go. Oh, okay.
Right. Oh, it's all going to work out. Never mind the 3 of Swords. Never mind the 10 of Swords. Never mind the 7 of Swords. It's that lover's card. That's what it's all about.
Needed to keep clarifying till I got there. Yeah.
We've all been there, girl.
So you, in addition to, being a diviner, I mentioned the Candle Magic book, which I love that book. It's fantastic. And you on your website, and for those who are watching the episode, we see part of your shop behind you and part of the work that you do in selling not just, the services of readings for people, but there's also educational content. And there's, of course, an enormous amount of materials of magic. And full spell kits to just single ingredients and candles and all sorts of things like that, which is it. I'm going to obviously link to your, website in the show notes. So people should check it out. With that I guess the first question I just want to ask you is how did that get started? Where did you get, I'm sure people were asking you for help with things and that's probably how it got started, but is there anything else about the development of that aspect?
Yeah, so I've been practicing witchcraft since I was in my 20s and wanted to be a witch before that. I remember being in junior high and finding Sybil Leek's Diary of a Witch in our school library, which was amazing. And whatever librarian at Lincoln Junior High School in Santa Monica brought in Sybil Leek books, bless you wherever you are. But it was really back then, it's hard to even fathom and remember how hard it was to find information back then. And especially for a kid, I could not, find a green egg magazine and order something out of a back of a magazine. It was you either had the library. That was it. We didn't go to bookstores or I guess I bought books. We had books in the house, but, it was such a, books were really precious and you could get free books at the library. So anything I could get my hands on that was in any way esoteric. I don't even remember what our question was. What was it?
Oh, just how did you get started also, then provide
with witchcraft? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So I was looking up, cryptozoology, reading about, it was the 70s, pyramid power, Bigfoot, ESP. My mom and I would practice ESP. We were just it was all this stuff, right? So anything that I could get that was esoteric, occult, anything I could get my little hands on, I was there. So I've been practicing witchcraft since I was in my 20s. And so I know and I believe deeply within my heart that we are the masters of our destiny, that we can shift and change things and move things in the direction that we want them to go. Right. So with my clients, I had people coming and saying, I want to do a spell about such and such or the other thing. And I would say, okay, well, you need this candle, but this candle doesn't exist in the world. Or at that time too, it was like it was hard, like the candle makers here in the States, it was really hard to find like a simple figural candle of a man or a woman in array of colors, right? Now it's much easier. But back then you got red, black, or green, basically, or white, red, black, green, and white. And so I'd be like, oh, you really actually need an orange one or you need a yellow one, but that doesn't exist. So that's really how I got started manufacturing, just like I read a book, because I'm like, that thing didn't exist in the world. And when I started, they didn't exist in the world. And the other thing was, I'm a super big proponent. Again, a Slavic magic thing is beeswax. It's huge. It's powerful. It is a materia magica in and of itself. It is, you think about the bees making that wax, they need to take 1 million trips to flowers to make 1 ounce of beeswax. Imagine all the flower energy, the bee energy, the life force in that beeswax. And then you're using it in your magic. That is powerful. I don't say don't do a candle with a paraffin candle, but paraffin is a byproduct of the oil industry. That is their trash. It is oil industry trash. It also has some issues. So in terms of health issues, if you're burning a lot of them, I found that out myself. So I wanted to make something that I was in alignment with who I was and my magic. And so that's why I started making candles. So now I do that. I teach magic. Just all kinds of things that we have here, and all of it is witchcrafted, as I like to say. So if you want to, nothing wrong with getting a paraffin birthday candle and doing a spell with that. I've done it. If that's what I got around, I'll do it. But I think, if you're really wanting to help the bees, number one, beekeeping helps bees because the beekeepers want their bees to survive and they work hard to keep their bees, right? And make sure and care for them and tend to them. So using beeswax, while it might be, some vegan people might think like, no, I don't want to do that. I feel like it's actually helping the bees, and, people are entitled to go down whatever path they want to go with that. But this is something I feel is very, very magical, and something that adds to your magic. Everything that we add to our magic is a little bit of a boost, even if we're doubtful about our outcomes,
Yeah. And I think that one of the things I wanted to ask is there anything about, because you do provide a lot of, very high quality materials for people. Is there something that is challenging to you about that? Like, how do you think about the balance between saying, well, I put this out into the world and it, people can use it for whatever purpose they want. Is there anything that like ethically you have thought about like trying to, you can't influence people. People are going to do magic for what they need and what they think they need. And that's their path. But are there any challenges with that you have sort of like thought with, or ways you've tried to, influence, in a positive direction that use?
Well, I think this is a great question, because in my witchcraft path, I went through feminist Wicca training. I was a feminist Wiccan. I was solitary practitioner. I'm a spiritualist. I'm an animist. I was a Slavic magic practitioner, Ukrainian magic practitioner. So there's I have all of these things that are part of my own practice. And what I have come to the conclusion in witchcraft is that I think people who initially enter into a path of doing witchcraft are coming from a culture, and maybe even personal family culture, where you are taught a religion, and a religion is hierarchical. No matter what religion it is, I don't care, whatever religion, there's somebody up at the top given the rules. These are the rules. You need to follow the rules. That is a religion, right? Witchcraft is not a religion. So guess what? You get to decide for you what is right for you and what your ethics are. It's like, that is a mind-blowing concept to most of us, especially us in the States and in, this Western culture. To have someone say there are no rules and you get to create your own rules of what works for you. And I really do empower people with that. So if you want to do a coercive spell, you want to make someone fall in love with you, if that is okay for you, you can do it. It is not for me to say, don't do it. If you want to curse somebody, again, I wouldn't do it. Sure wouldn't do it. But if you want to do that, it is not for me to say. It is your practice and your ethics. And it's you dealing with your own deities, spirits, inner self, higher self, whatever you want to call it, deeper self. That is for you. And so I think I really live by that. Like, it's not for me to say. It's not for me to say. I create pretty positive things for the most part. I do have breakup spells. Yes, there are situations where breakup spell is justifiable, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Don't have much cursing products, so that's not my jam. Not interested in it. Don't have anything to sort of invoke demons, because that's not my jam. But you can do whatever you want. It's not for me to say. There's no Pope of witchcraft, in other words.
Thank goodness. No, but it is true that, like, if we acknowledge, I think it was Ronald Hutton, who was talking about, when we acknowledge these things are real, if we're saying, yeah, witchcraft is a real thing, then that means that the possibility, just like, things that heal can also harm. It's like, well, yeah, it has a lot of potential power. But I like what you're saying, how, like, that is then the responsibility of each of us to acknowledge and then make our own choices with, because it is potentially quite powerful. But you are the one who's going to do that. So you need to manage that and think with that, whatever your choice. So,
yeah. And I think that is a wonderful reflection that we, a lot of religion, as we see a lot of religion, there's good things that come out of religion. There's freaking horrible things that come out of religion. And oftentimes these leaders are sometimes the most unethical people. We can see a lot of lack of ethics with, religious leaders. And, there's a agenda with religion, which is, I'm going to tell you what to do because it benefits me in some way. There's a benefit, right? Top-down hierarchy. So the fact that there's this anarchistic element to witchcraft completely appeals to me. It may not be for everyone. Some people need to have rules and regulations. They don't want to do the work of reflecting and thinking and judging and deciding for themselves. They want to just have someone tell them what to do. This is good and you'll go to heaven. This is bad and you'll go to hell. If that kind of black and white thinking works for someone, that's their choice. But witchcraft is not that. Witchcraft is never that, right? So, yeah.
I like to sometimes reflect on what misconceptions people have about the work that we do. And it's always interesting to me to ask guests that come on the show, like, what are some of the things that people will assume about the work that you do that you have to clear up, or a question that you get asked a lot where you're like, no, actually it's this. Is there anything that you feel like, whether it's, to do with divinatory work or the work that you do sort of offering those services, are there misconceptions that you're like, I wish that people would just not assume that?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you there was one time many, 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 many years ago. Remember, I was telling you my fear was not of making a mistake in a reading, because I had lots of experience. It was being judged by people for that. Super big fear of mine. I went, amazing colleague, wonderful friend and colleague. Her name is Doña Fortuna. She's amazing. She did a session on me where she said, what do you want to work on? I said, I want to work on my fear of judgment. I still have it, even though I'm out there and doing it. This is, again, decades ago. And I'm like, I still feel it. She goes, okay, let's do this work. And she did this session, like a shamanic session with me. And then not like 3 months later, I'm doing readings at a party. This is back when I'm doing readings at parties. And I'm doing readings at a party, and it was a weird party. It was a weird freaking party. It felt a bit like a weird swingers party. That's what it felt like to me. The vibe was that.
Mhm.
So they had me in this little corner. I'm doing readings, and somebody comes. It was the end of my time. I was getting ready to go. I had this weird feeling like they were trying to like get me into their swinger thing, and I'm like, I don't think so. I'm gonna go home now. Um, so um, this they said, oh, so and so wants you to do has a question for you. That's what the phrasing was. They have a question for you, but they want you to answer it out in the living room. I'm like, okay. They want me to do a reading in front of their friends or whatever. And I'm fine. I was in a little cubby and a little nook. So I go out there and this big fat white guy is like, I'm a judge. I'm a judge on the Santa Monica courts and blah, 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 blah. And he said, I have a question for you. I said, okay. And he said, what does it feel like being a fraud? How do you feel being a fraud? And I said, and I came back to him and I was like, I don't know, because I'm not a fraud.
Damn.
I just sassed him right back.
Yeah.
And I was like, that moment to me was like a huge shift, because instead of being afraid of being judged, here's a judge judging me, calling me out publicly in front of people that I didn't really care anything one way or the other about. But I was like, I sassed him right back and I started laughing. I go, what an idiot, right? So I felt like that was the moment that I broke free of the fear of judgment. So now, like when people, that was the thing. I'm like, what are you fraud? No. Oh, it's like laughable to me. So if people don't get it, they don't get it. And I'm like, okay, fine. I don't get a lot of things that other people do, and it's fine, right? So, I don't really get too much. Maybe I'm living in this rarefied world now. I don't get too much people like saying, or maybe the spell was cast, and the spell is you're not going to be judged by people. You had that moment where you were really judged by a judge, and you stood up and were like empowered in that moment. And everyone came back after that, by the way. Everyone in the party was like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed that he did that. I can't believe he did that. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I'm like, I didn't care. I was like, no big deal to me.
Yep.
He was like the idiot, not me. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is very, very true. I think that also then ties into seeing how all of this building of confidence in reading is also then part of that magical building of confidence in everything that you're doing. It is not one specific area of your life. It's then, obviously building on each of these moments in our lives that then transform us. Oh, witchcraft transformation, what? Into the people that we become. And that is a really important thing. It's kind of curious to me, because there's oftentimes when I'll talk about divination, people will say, oh, well, it's just, even when it was done in historical times, in academia, they'll do the same thing of like, oh, well, in Rome, all they did was they just manipulated it for whatever the Senate wanted. And I'm like, actually, there's a lot of evidence that they didn't, and that sometimes it went against what the Senate wanted. But there's the sort of the bias of, well, of course, they just pushed it to whatever they wanted. And then you're like, but actually, the historical record doesn't even match that. Of course, some people did. People are people. They're going to manipulate information the same way people have always tried to manipulate information. That's not new, but it's not like all that it is. So it's funny, because that's in academia in the modern day, it's percolates.
Well, on that, I have a new book coming out in January, which is called The Witch's Guide to Animal Familiars. And it's all about working with animals in your magic. I'm so excited for this book. There's no book out there that's like this, that talks about all kinds of different animals that you can build relationship with, make magic with, and it really covers generally and specifically, right? So in talking about that, I learned about the Polarius. Do you know about the Polarius?
Yes.
Okay, so for those who don't know, the Polarius is, back in ancient Rome, they would have a magic rooster, and the keeper of the rooster was the soothsayer. They would put some grain out, and they would see how the rooster acted when the rooster was released from the basket, pecking the grain, freaking out, doing whatever, to guide these big decisions, these big governmental decisions or war decisions, right? Which, should we go attack? Should we do this? Should we do that? How can you control a chicken? How can you make a chicken be what you want it to be? There were rules, like if it does this, it means this. If it does this, it means this. This is not oh, well, like the devil card can mean this or the devil card can mean that. It is most genuinely what the chicken does. And people took it with great seriousness. I was fascinated by that. Like I knew about modern day chicken, soothsaying, but to find that it went back to Roman times and to see that it was used for these like really important decisions was phenomenally amazing and enlightening and wonderful. So stick it, academics.
So glad you included that because yes, I keep chickens. I live on a farm and I'm like, yeah, oh, divination by chickens. Yes. Yes.
That. I love
Probably
that.
not the authentic Roman practices, but at the same time, yes.
Yeah.
But it's all, yeah. What people do not experience and they haven't done, it's is much easier to dismiss or just ignore altogether. So yeah, that is a very, very interesting thing. Well, you've already told us about one of the things that you have coming up, which I'm super excited about that book. I'm sure that will be fantastic. And then we should talk about it after that comes out, I hope.
Yeah.
With that in mind, before we kind of wrap up, I'd like to ask if there are things that you would like to encourage people to spend more time on, or sort of advice that you would like to leave people with, whether that has to do with divination and kind of improving their divinatory practices, or just in general things that you think are important that you try to stress with your students or your friends or your clients.
I think that the sort of foundational thing is that whatever situation that you're in, even if it's a spiritual thing, not a material thing, there are things that you can do, things that you can shift in your mindset, things that you can do practically, things that you can do magically that can change and improve your situation, no matter what is going on, no matter what is going on. So to not to be moving forward. This is what we're meant to do things in this lifetime. You have a wonderful lifetime that you get to accomplish things and have opportunities. So take those opportunities, do those things, create and craft your life, your one life in this body, right? You'll come back in another body, but the one life in this body, make it count. And that can be like from this perspective, I work with spirit guides. I'm a spiritualist. I work with spirit guides, and spirit guides have one answer when people ask, what is my purpose? And your purpose, all of our purpose, our like mission, what we're here to do is to positively affect one being, right? Because if we think about this network of energies and connections that exist out there, we have an opportunity to bring goodness. So whether you find a wounded animal and you nurse it back to health, or you find a little plant that needs water and you water it and nurture it and bring it back to life. If you find another person and you uplift that person, then you've accomplished your mission. You only have to do it once. Anything out beyond that is gravy. The more you do it, the more beautiful, the more rich your connections are going to be, the more energy you will have. But I think this is like the main purpose. And there's so many ways that you can help. There's so many ways that you can do something positive. There's so many ways you can uplift. I mean, it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a plant. It could be the earth. It could be picking up a piece of trash. Pick up one piece of trash and your mission is accomplished. That's easy.
Yeah. And as humans, we like to overcomplicate a lot of things, but sometimes well, thank you for that. I think that is really beautiful and a lovely way to close. But I want like I said, I will put things in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to share with people about what you are up to or things that are coming up?
Yes, in October, once a year I do a live over Zoom tarot workshop series, and I only do it once a year because it's a very intensive. I do beginning, advanced, and professionals, and they're 5 weeks. We meet on Sundays at 12 noon Pacific. That would be 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we have 5 weeks of learning. So there's a beginning. The beginning series is starting in October. The advanced series will be starting like mid-November, and then the professional series starts in January. So if you want to get on board for that, if you go to losangelestaroreader.com, it'll take you directly to the page on my website, or they can go to Parlor Wonders and go to workshops, and then there'll be a link on that page. So either way, we'll get them to the same thing. And it's a wonderful thing. I taught for many, many years, taught tarot in person because I saw the value in like experience. Honestly, you can read a million tarot books. You can read a million tarot books, but it will not make you a tarot reader until you actually start doing readings for other people. So in a classroom where you have another student and you two are reading for each other, it is the most valuable thing to get you to that place. So when Zoom came out like 5 years ago with the breakout rooms where people could practice one-on-one, I'm like, now I can teach online, because it isn't something you can learn from watching a video. It isn't something you can learn by sitting and listening to a lecture. You must have the experience, because that is everything. So anyway, so my classes start in October, and I would love to see some of your listeners over there. It's a lot of fun. We have a great time. It's very supportive, very encouraging. So if you know anyone that's had discouragement or had a hard time or feel defeated by tarot, I welcome you, because you will blossom. And I love seeing, that's what I love about teaching, is watching the blossoming happen. That's the best part of teaching. So
yeah, that is wonderful. I'll make sure that those show notes, that is in the show notes, so people can go and find those links. And that is great. So I have really appreciated your time, and I appreciate your expertise, and I hope that we get to talk again soon. So thank you for your time.
thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. It was delightful. I feel like we're old friends now. We need to sit down and have a chit chat anytime.
That
So
would be
good.
fun. All right. Thank you.
Black moon above, stars overhead. Don't you dare guide me back to my bed. The river is frozen, the pollen pads bare. Don't wait for me, darling, there's thorns